No one warned you, not your father, not your mentors, not even the world that watched you kneel, then called it love. She didn't ruin you. You did, the moment you crowned her your purpose and abandoned your throne. Machiavelli never wrote a love manual, but he did write about power. And if you read between the lines, you'll see he understood something most men still don't. The downfall of a man doesn't begin with defeat. It begins with worship, not of God, not of meaning, but of a woman mistaken for salvation. This video isn't for the man who wants to be comforted, it's for the man who knows something sacred inside him was handed away, and he's finally ready to take it back, not with rage, but with remembrance. Because the real tragedy isn't losing her, it's forgetting who you were before she looked at you like you mattered. He never saw it coming. The way her silence felt like home. The way her praise made him forget himself. What he called chemistry was really memory. The kind his body remembered, but his mind had repressed. She wasn't love. She was a stand-in for a voice that never told him he mattered. That hole in his chest, it didn't begin with her. It began with the man who never looked back. He chased her because he never knew what it meant to be chosen. Not for usefulness, not for performance, but for being. Every compliment she gave became oxygen. Every withdrawal, a panic. She wasn't affectionate. She was a symbol of absence that smiled back, and like a wounded animal, he kept returning to the echo of his own abandonment. Jung would say, this isn't love, it's reenactment. The father wound mutates, becomes romantic obsession. You think you miss her, you don't. You miss who you hoped you'd be in her eyes. It's not desire, it's a desperate attempt at internal resurrection. You keep dating your ghost and expecting it to kiss you back. Machiavelli warned, those who rise without a foundation collapse with praise. And what foundation did you have? A name, a role, a body raised without a spine. You wanted her to validate your existence because no man ever did. So you built yourself around her gaze. When she looked away, you disappeared. The truth is you were never seen, and that made every stare feel holy. You became the perfect man, attentive, generous, romantic, not because you knew love, but because you were terrified of being discarded. You kept giving and giving, hoping she'd notice the weight you were lifting, but she couldn't, because what you really wanted wasn't love. It was correction. She was the confessional you brought your childhood to, hoping for redemption. Let's call it what it is. You were in survival, not romance. When she pulled away, your world collapsed. Not because she was special, but because your self-worth was still stored in someone else's hands. She didn't leave a man. She left a child hoping to be adopted, and that's the wound you've been kissing on other women's lips ever since. The feminine became your medicine and your anesthesia. You gave her power over your nervous system, your time, your identity, and the cruelest part, she never asked for it. You projected the divine onto someone just as wounded as you, then blamed her when the illusion broke. She wasn't love. She was the pain you inherited, dressed as affection. And every time you called it passion, you buried your father deeper. She didn't betray you. She mirrored the neglect you refused to name. And until you do, you'll keep calling your trauma chemistry. You weren't in love. You were in grief, trying to rewrite an origin you never chose. He said she was peaceful, but what he meant was, she didn't question his disappearance. Not once did she ask what haunted him, what dreams he buried to survive. She matched his quiet like a mirror matches emptiness, perfectly. It wasn't connection, it was camouflage. You keep falling for women who don't interrupt your numbness, not because it's healthy, but because silence feels safe. Real presence threatens the mask, and you've worn it so long it feels like skin. She didn't see you, but that was the deal, wasn't it? No one sees. No one touches the place where the real you lives. Machiavelli said, never reveal your full self to those who only show you fragments. But that's exactly what you keep doing, offering slivers, hoping someone stitches them into love. You choose women who stay distant because it keeps you from confronting the part of you that's already disappeared. And they love your calm because it asks nothing of them either. It's not intimacy. It's a mutual truce between two ghosts. You thought you wanted softness, but real softness exposes the raw, the anger, the guilt, the yearning. And you've kept that hidden so long, you've forgotten what it's like to feel without flinching. She wasn't soft, she was silent, like you. And in that silence, you saw safety, not truth. There is no alchemy in a woman who disappears beside you. You keep mistaking quiet for compatibility when it's really emotional suppression in drag. She didn't understand your pain, she just didn't challenge it. Because she had her own pain to guard. So you both sat there, two unspoken confessions wrapped in bodies, pretending to be whole. You want a woman who feels like home, but only if home doesn't remind you of your ruins. So you build rituals of routine, quiet dinners, subtle kisses, emotional politeness, but none of it moves the soul, because movement would mean confrontation, and confrontation means risking abandonment. The truth? You don't fall in love with women. You fall in love with what they leave untouched in you. She never asked why you stare into the dark after midnight. She never knocked on the door you locked inside yourself. So she stayed, until the day her silence became unbearable even to her. Stop choosing partners who echo your disappearance. You weren't drawn to her stillness because it healed you. You were drawn to her stillness because it let you hide longer. She wasn't quiet because she understood. She was quiet because she never looked. She never had to ask where you stood, because you were always there, always available, always agreeable, always ready to please. What you thought was devotion was just a blueprint she could read blindfolded. You became her habit, not her mystery. And in love, habits don't survive storms. You believed that loyalty guaranteed love, but loyalty without boundaries isn't strength, it's a performance. She knew your next move before you did. There was no edge, no question, no fire left to respect. You became reliable and then invisible. Machiavelli warned, a man who is predictable can be overthrown by suggestion. And that's what happened. You made yourself emotionally available at all times, and in doing so erased your value. She didn't have to earn access to your depth. You handed her the keys, and what costs nothing is respected the same. You confused consistency with presence. But you were consistent the way furniture is. Solid, silent, taken for granted. You gave her your best lines before she earned the right to hear your truth. You showed up with your heart already opened, bleeding on the doorstep, and then wondered why she walked over it like it wasn't sacred. She didn't leave because you weren't enough. She left because she memorized your entire emotional map and found no unknowns. You were a temple with no priest, holy in design but empty in ritual. What began as romance ended in routine. You worshipped her. You bent your fire to fit her comfort. You shrank your presence to make her feel more at ease. And in doing so, you became a man she could manage, not admire. Predictable, programmable, powerless. You thought being safe would earn love. But real love doesn't want a cage. It wants a challenge. And once she realized your passion came with no spine, once she knew your anger had been buried under politeness, she stopped asking questions and started looking elsewhere. You became a story with no plot. Your loyalty was noble, yes, but it wasn't magnetic. She respected your presence, but not your mystery. She knew your rhythm so well, she stopped dancing. Worship didn't make her stay, it made her sleep. You didn't love her. You loved the reflection, the man you thought you became when she smiled. Her eyes were your mirror, and for a while, you liked what you saw. But the moment she looked away, you cracked. Because you weren't in love, you were in costume. You served a version of yourself that only existed when she approved. Every joke, every gesture, every decision bent toward her gaze. She became your compass, your stage, your judge, and you kept performing, terrified of the silence when the applause stops. You mistook her attention for transformation. Jung would say this isn't romance, it's projection. You weren't chasing connection, you were chasing confirmation that maybe you were finally enough, that maybe someone saw the light you'd buried. But she didn't see you, she saw what you presented, and when she stopped applauding, you vanished with the echo. Machiavelli warned, control a man's perception of himself and you own his actions. You weren't manipulated by her body. You were enslaved by your own image in her eyes. She gave you a role and you filled it like a desperate actor. Every compliment was a leash, every silence a sentence. You became her puppet, wired to the hope of becoming whole. The tragedy, you believed it was love, but love doesn't cost identity. It doesn't demand self-abandonment for validation. What you felt was not devotion, it was dependency, and dependency always dresses itself in fantasy. She wasn't your salvation, she was your seduction back into performance. You believed her gaze gave you worth, so when she stopped looking, you collapsed. Not because she left, but because you never learned how to see yourself without her. Her affection was your mask, her withdrawal was your funeral, and the man underneath, he never got a name. You didn't fall for her. You fell for who you believed you were when she touched you. But if you vanish the moment she stops approving, you never truly existed. You were a mirage built on borrowed validation. And now you're mourning not the loss of her, but the loss of the illusion. Her attention was your costume, and when it slipped, so did the role you played. You weren't broken because she left. You were broken because she took the fantasy with her. And now, finally, you're left with the only thing real, yourself. You called it love, but it was abdication of your power, your purpose, your center. You stepped off your throne, handed her the crown and smiled, and she accepted until she realized she never asked for it. You gave her the weight and called it romance. At first it felt flattering. You adored her every word. You orbited her moods like they were the moon. But slowly, the reverence turned into pressure. Your devotion became a cage she couldn't name. Because you disappeared and left her to carry both your shadows. Machiavelli said, "He who makes himself too dependent loses not just power, but respect." You didn't lose her because you lacked strength. You lost her because you buried it beneath praise. You became agreeable, predictable, sacrificial, a man too soft to stand. And when you stopped being a mystery, she stopped being inspired. You thought she left because you weren't enough. But the truth is brutal. She left because you gave too much of what was never asked. She didn't want to be worshipped. She wanted to be met by a man who held his frame, who didn't mistake surrender for seduction. You made her your god and cursed her for not acting divine. She began to resent you, not loudly, not cruelly, but in the way women do when they realize they're mothering a man who's forgotten himself. Every gesture became an obligation, every kiss a negotiation. You turned her affection into duty, and duty kills desire. She loved you until she didn't recognize you anymore, until your spine bent so far it dissolved, until your kindness became compliance, and your presence a constant apology. You were no longer her man. You were her burden. You thought being everything she wanted would make her stay. But real women don't desire everything. They desire something real. She didn't want you to vanish in her service. She wanted you to stay visible, solid, sovereign, sharp, but you melted and called it love. You built her a crown and melted your spine to do it. And no woman wants to sit on a throne made of a man's surrender. She didn't betray you. She just stopped pretending your self-erasure was love, and now all that's left is the empty throne you once abandoned. She wasn't cold, she was distant, and you mistook the chill as depth. Every withheld word felt like mystery. Every delayed reply, a riddle you had to solve. But that ache in your chest, that wasn't desire, that was abandonment, and you called it love. You became addicted to her inconsistency. Every small act of attention felt like a reward for your suffering. She trained your nervous system to chase approval the way a dog chases scraps. And still, you stayed. Not because she was extraordinary, but because you were starving for recognition. Jung said, "The man projects his internal punishment through the woman's withholding." You weren't being tested. You were reenacting a script. One where you had to earn love through endurance. One where silence felt familiar because it sounded like your childhood. She didn't neglect you. She mirrored what you already believed you deserved. You thought passion required struggle, that if it didn't hurt, it wasn't real. But love isn't supposed to feel like recovery from emotional warfare. You weren't drawn to her fire, you were burned by it and kept calling it warmth. It's not depth if it leaves you hollow. Her indifference wasn't mystique, it was clarity. And you refused to see it because pain felt like home. Every time she pulled away, you chased harder, hoping to prove your worth. But that wasn't love. That was a boy begging not to be abandoned again. You bled just to keep her interested. She didn't test your love, she exposed your self-neglect. And instead of walking away, you dug deeper, hoping the excavation would turn into affection. But nothing grows in ground that's never been watered. You kept planting your soul in her drought. Passion doesn't require punishment. If you believe it does, you've mistaken intensity for intimacy. What you need is not a woman to confirm your pain. What you need is to stop seeking validation in rejection. Because love that demands you shrink isn't love. She didn't destroy you. She reflected the fracture you've never named. You didn't stay because she was irreplaceable. You stayed because you believed suffering was the price of connection. And now, maybe, you're finally ready to question who taught you that lie. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. She told you you were strong, and just like that you stopped being, you started proving. Every compliment became a stage, every glance a spotlight. You weren't being yourself, you were auditioning, and you mistook applause for authenticity. You became addicted to the praise, not because it healed you, but because it distracted you from your doubt. You needed her validation like oxygen, not to breathe, but to be. So you played the role, confident, disciplined, desirable, until the role became your prison. Machiavelli warned, flattery is a tool, and the flatterer owns the clock of the man he praises. And so she did. She set your tempo. Your worth rose and fell with her mood. One word from her could lift you. One silence and you shattered. That wasn't love. That was emotional dependency disguised as admiration. You were never seen, just applauded. You didn't become a man. You became her favorite act, the protector when she felt weak, the poet when she felt empty. And the moment you broke character, she pulled back, because you weren't allowed to be real, just reliable. Your masculinity became a transaction. Perform well, get affection. Show doubt, get punished. So you smiled through exhaustion, flexed through fear, carried burdens in silence, not because you were strong, but because strength had become your costume, and you forgot how to take it off, refused to earn what must be offered freely. If your worth depends on perfect performance, then your soul is already in chains. You weren't loved, you were consumed. She didn't admire you, she relied on your suppression. And when your mask slipped, so did her illusion. You shaped yourself to fit her gaze and lost your outline. Every compliment became a leash, every thank you another collar, until you couldn't move without wondering how it would land. That's not leadership, that's captivity. And you wore it like armor. You didn't become her man, you became her applause. And the tragedy? You believed the praise meant you were finally seen, but real recognition doesn't demand performance. It allows rest. She told you you were strong. And just like that, you stopped being. You started proving. Every compliment became a stage, every glance a spotlight. You weren't being yourself, you were auditioning. And you mistook applause for authenticity. You became addicted to the praise, not because it healed you, but because it distracted you from your doubt. You needed her validation like oxygen, not to breathe but to be. So you played the role, confident, disciplined, desirable, until the role became your prison. Machiavelli warned, flattery is a tool, and the flatterer owns the clock of the man he praises. And so she did. She set your tempo. Your worth rose and fell with her mood. One word from her could lift you, one silence, and you shattered. That wasn't love. That was emotional dependency disguised as admiration. You were never seen, just applauded. You didn't become a man. You became her favorite act, the protector when she felt weak, the poet when she felt empty. And the moment you broke character, she pulled back, because you weren't allowed to be real, just reliable. Your masculinity became a transaction. Perform well, get affection, show doubt, get punished. So you smiled through exhaustion, flexed through fear, carried burdens in silence. Not because you were strong, but because strength had become your costume, and you forgot how to take it off, refused to earn what must be offered freely. If your worth depends on perfect performance, then your soul is already in chains. You weren't loved, you were consumed. She didn't admire you. She relied on your suppression. And when your mask slipped, so did her illusion. You shaped yourself to fit her gaze and lost your outline. Every compliment became a leash, every thank you another collar, until you couldn't move without wondering how it would land. That's not leadership, that's captivity, and you wore it like armor. You didn't become her man, you became her applause, and the tragedy? You believed the praise meant you were finally seen, but real recognition doesn't demand performance, it allows rest. So now you know, it wasn't love, it was a forgetting, dressed as romance, a sacred self-abandoned in the name of being chosen. But ask yourself this, what if everything you admired in her was just the reflection of everything you refused to claim in yourself? What if her silence mirrored the silence you live in? What if her withdrawal revealed the places where you disappeared long before she did? This was never about her. It was about the throne you left empty, the sword you let rust, the fire you let her gaze extinguish. You don't need revenge, you need reconstruction. Not louder, not softer, just sovereign, again. Because when you stop worshipping the woman who watched you fall, you finally remember the man who's meant to rise. And if that man still lives inside you, subscribe, turn on notifications, and continue this journey of brutal self-knowledge and emotional freedom. You thought you chose her, but what if it was your wound that did the choosing, and she was just the shape your pain took to feel like purpose? In the next video, Machiavelli would understand why.